They say time heals all wounds. But they're wrong. Time doesn't heal, it just teaches you how to live with the bleeding. I'm 73 years old now, and I'm about to tell you about the day my daughter became a ghost. Not the kind that haunts houses, but the kind that haunts mothers, the kind you see in every empty chair, every unanswered phone call, every birthday that passes in silence. The kind that makes strangers whisper behind your back at the grocery store while you're just trying to buy bread and pretend your world hasn't ended. This is a story about betrayal. About $47,000 that disappeared in a single night. About a daughter who vanished like smoke, and a mother who spent 20 years learning how to hate. But it's also about a rusted key, a letter written by a dead woman's hand, and the grandson I never knew existed who showed up at my door 3 weeks ago and cracked open everything I thought I knew about loss. My name is Margaret. And this is the story of how I learned that some people come home long after they've stopped breathing. 20 years ago, I was 53 years old and I believed in 3 things: hard work, sacrifice, and the bank account that proved I'd done both. Let me paint you a picture of who I was back then. I worked in the cafeteria at St. Mary's Hospital, the kind of job where you smell like industrial gravy and disappointment by the end of your shift. I wore the same 4 uniforms on rotation, stitching the hems when they frayed because buying new ones felt like admitting defeat. I walked 30 minutes to work every morning, even in winter, because bus fare added up. Every paycheck, I'd take my cash to First National Bank and hand it to the same teller, a sweet girl named Patty who knew me by name. She'd stamp my deposit slip and smile, and I'd walk out feeling like I'd won something. Because that savings account? That wasn't just money. That was dignity. That was proof that a woman who started with nothing could build something solid. $47,000. Every penny earned in sweat and silence. I was saving it for my daughter, Elena. She was 25 then, beautiful in that restless way young women are when they don't quite know what they want but they're certain it's not here. Dark hair, darker eyes, always looking at the horizon like she was waiting for something better to arrive. I won't lie to you, we fought. About boys, about money, about the way she'd roll her eyes when I'd tell her to save for a rainy day. She thought I was too hard, too proud, too stuck in my ways. Maybe I was. But I'd raised her alone since her father left when she was 3, and I'd be damned if she'd grow up soft and unprepared for how cruel this world can be. I thought I was teaching her strength. Turns out, I might have just been teaching her that I couldn't be trusted with weakness. I remember because Tuesdays were always slow at the hospital. I'd clocked out early, stopped by the bank to withdraw $800 for a new water heater. The old one had been making this groaning sound like it was dying, and I couldn't afford to wait until it flooded the basement. I handed Patty my withdrawal slip. She scanned it, frowned at her computer screen, then looked up at me with these wide, confused eyes. "Mrs. Chin, there's a problem." My stomach dropped before my brain even caught up. What kind of problem? She turned the screen toward me. I saw my account number. I saw my name. And I saw a balance that made the room tilt sideways. $14.32. That can't be right, I said, hearing my voice come out strange and distant. Check again. That's $47,000. Check again. But Patty's face told me everything. She pulled up the transaction history with shaking hands. 1 withdrawal. 2 days ago. $46,985.68. Everything except what was legally required to keep the account open. The signature on the withdrawal slip was perfect. Elena's looping handwriting, the way she always made her look like a bird in flight. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember parking. I just remember standing in the doorway of Elena's bedroom, staring at empty drawers hanging open like mouths. Her closet, cleared. Her dresser, bare. The little porcelain jewelry box I'd given her for her 16th birthday, gone. Even the photos she'd tacked to her mirror had been peeled away, leaving nothing but sticky residue and blank wall. No note. No explanation. Just absence so complete it felt like she'd never existed at all. I called her cell phone 63 times that first day. It went straight to voicemail. That cheerful recording of her voice saying, "Hey, it's Elena. Leave me a message and I'll call you back." Except she wouldn't. She never would again. I filed a police report that evening. A tired detective with coffee breath took my statement in a windowless room that smelled like old cigarettes and broken families. "Any reason she might have left?" he asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "She took everything I had," I said, my voice steady because I refused to cry in front of strangers. "That's reason enough to find her." He nodded, wrote something down, and I could see it in his face, the thing he wasn't saying. This wasn't a criminal case. This was a family matter. This was a daughter who'd had enough and decided to take what she thought she was owed. "We'll look into it," he said, handing me a card. "But ma'am, most of the time in these situations, people don't want to be found." First came the shock. Then came the sympathy. Then, and this is when it got really bad, came the gossip. Small towns are like organisms. They can smell blood in the water, and they circle. At church, women who'd smiled at me for 20 years suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. At the grocery store, conversations would stop when I walked down the aisle, then resume in urgent whispers the second I turned the corner. I heard fragments. Enough to piece together what they were saying. Must have been bad at home for her to do something like that. You know Margaret. Always so proud. So cold. Never showed that girl any warmth. I always thought there was something off about their relationship. They'd rewritten history in a week. Suddenly, every time I'd been firm with Elena, every time I'd said no, every time I'd pushed her to be stronger, all of it became evidence of my failure. Proof that I was the kind of mother a daughter had to steal from just to escape. And maybe the worst part. A small, poisonous voice in my head started to wonder if they were right. It wasn't a choice, really. The mortgage was underwater, the savings were gone, and every room held Elena's ghost. I'd find one of her hair ties on the bathroom counter, or I'd smell her perfume on a jacket she'd left behind, and the grief would hit me so hard I'd have to sit down on the floor and just breathe. I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment above Fuller's hardware store. It was cheap, it was quiet, and it had no memories. I worked double shifts. I ate canned soup for dinner. I learned how to carry loneliness like a second skeleton inside my first. And I made myself a promise, sealed with all the bitterness and betrayal hardening in my chest like cement, I would never speak Elena's name again. I boxed up her photos, the baby pictures, the school portraits, the snapshot of us at the county fair when she was 12 and still thought I hung the moon. I donated her childhood things to Goodwill. I took her name off my emergency contact forms. I practiced telling people I had no children when they asked, saying it over and over until my mouth stopped trembling around the lie. If she could erase me from her life, I could erase her from mine. But here's what I learned about erasure: you can throw away every photograph, every memento, every physical reminder of a person, but you can't throw away the hole they left behind. That's how long I carried it. The anger, the humiliation, the betrayal that had burrowed so deep into my bones it became part of my structure. I built my entire life around that wound. Every decision I made, every relationship I avoided, every wall I constructed, all of it designed to protect the one truth I knew for certain. Love was dangerous. Trust was weakness. And the people closest to you would hurt you worst of all. I grew old inside that truth. My hair went gray. My hands developed arthritis. I founded a women's shelter, not out of kindness, but out of rage. I wanted to help women who'd been abandoned, betrayed, left with nothing. Women like me. And for 20 years, I told myself I'd buried Elena. That I'd mourned and moved on. That I was fine. But you can't bury someone who's still breathing somewhere in the world. You just pretend you have. 3 weeks ago, on a Sunday morning while I was sorting pills into my weekly container, someone knocked on my door. 3 soft taps. Hesitant. Polite. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never expected anyone. I opened the door, already preparing to tell whatever missionary or salesman to go away. And I saw Elena's eyes staring back at me from a stranger's face. So here's my question for you, before we go any further. What would you do if the child who destroyed you sent their child to your door 20 years later? Would you slam it shut? Would you let them in? And would you be ready for the truth that came with them, even if it shattered everything you'd spent 2 decades believing? Because I wasn't ready. Not even close. Standing in my doorway that Sunday morning was a young man, mid-20s, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and carrying the kind of nervous energy that makes the air feel electric. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. Dark brown. Deep set. The exact shape and shade of the eyes I'd spent 20 years trying to forget. Elena's eyes. Staring at me from a face I'd never seen before. My hand tightened on the doorknob. My first instinct was to slam the door, lock it, pretend this wasn't happening. Because I knew, the way you know a storm is coming by the smell of the air, that whatever this stranger was about to tell me would destroy the carefully constructed fortress I'd built around my pain. But I didn't close the door. And that decision changed everything. Mrs. Chen? His voice cracked on my name. Margaret Chen? I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up like a fist. He swallowed hard, shifted his weight from foot to foot, and said the words that would detonate my entire world. My name is Noah. I'm your grandson. And my mother asked me to give you this. I watched his hand reach into his jacket pocket, watched it like I was underwater, like everything was moving through molasses. He pulled out 2 things, a small rusted key on a frayed piece of string, and an envelope so old the edges had gone soft and yellow with age. The envelope had my name written across it in handwriting I would have recognized in my sleep. Elena's looping script, the way she always made her letters dance across the page like they were too excited to stand still. I don't. My voice came out as a whisper. I don't have a grandson. I know. Noah's eyes filled with something that looked like pity, and I hated him for it. She never told you about me. She never told you about a lot of things. The key swung between us like a pendulum, catching the morning light. It was small, brass, the kind that opens safe deposit boxes. The string was frayed and dirty, like it had been held in someone's hand for years, worried over like a prayer bead. Where is she? The question came out harder than I intended. Where's Elena? And that's when I saw it, the flicker of pain that crossed his face, the way his jaw tightened, the slight shake of his head. She died, he said quietly. 6 months ago. Cancer. She made me promise to find you. Made me swear I'd deliver these before. He stopped, composed himself. Before it was too late. Have you ever had the ground disappear beneath your feet while you're still standing on it? I let him in. I don't know why. Maybe because he had her eyes. Maybe because 20 years of anger had left me so exhausted I didn't have the strength to maintain it anymore. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten alone for 2 decades. I made tea because that's what you do when your dead daughter's son shows up and hands you a key to secrets you never knew existed. You boil water. You pretend you're in control. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The paper inside was brittle, covered in Elena's handwriting. Dated 19 years ago. Dear Mama, it began, and my vision blurred immediately. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means Noah kept his promise. I need you to know that leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I need you to know why. I looked up at Noah. What does she mean, why? She stole from me. She abandoned me. What possible reason? Keep reading, he said softly. Please. So I did. And with every line, the story I'd told myself for 20 years began to crumble. The boyfriend I'd disapproved of, the charming one with the easy smile who'd seemed too smooth, too perfect. I'd told Elena he was trouble. We'd fought about it. She'd accused me of trying to control her life, of never trusting her judgment, of being so rigid and proud that I couldn't stand to see her happy. I thought I'd been protecting her. Turns out, I'd been right for all the wrong reasons. Marcus wasn't just trouble. He was dangerous. Elena wrote about how the charm had curdled into control within months. How he'd isolated her from her friends first, then from me. How he'd monitored her phone calls, her text messages, her every movement. How he'd told her that if she ever tried to leave, he'd make sure she regretted it. He said he'd hurt you, Mama. He said he knew where you worked, what time you left, how you walked home alone in the dark. And I believed him. Because by then, I'd seen what he was capable of. My tea had gone cold. My hands had gone numb. Noah sat across from me, perfectly still, letting me absorb this. She was trapped, I whispered. All that time I thought she was choosing him over me, she was trapped. The money was her escape plan, Noah said. It was the only way she could disappear fast enough that he couldn't follow. She took it, bought a bus ticket to Seattle, and vanished. She changed her name. Changed her life. Spent 3 years looking over her shoulder, terrified he'd find her. And suddenly, every angry thought I'd had about Elena for 20 years turned toxic in my mouth. But here's the thing about the truth, it doesn't just rewrite the past. It rewrites you. I kept reading. Elena's letter explained why she never came back. It wasn't just fear of Marcus, though that fear lasted years, long after she'd rebuilt her life in Seattle. It was shame. Guilt. The crushing weight of knowing what she'd done to me, how the town had treated me, how completely she'd destroyed the one person who'd loved her most. I followed you from afar, Mama. I subscribed to the town newspaper. I called the hospital every few months, pretending to be an old friend, just to hear them say you still worked there. I knew you sold the house. I knew people whispered about you at church. I knew I'd turned you into the villain of your own life. And I was too much of a coward to fix it. The letter went on. Elena had met a man in Seattle, a kind man, she wrote, nothing like Marcus. They'd had a son. Noah. The man had died in a car accident when Noah was 3, and Elena had raised him alone, working 2 jobs, just like I had raised her. History repeating itself, but with one crucial difference, Elena had told Noah about me. Had shown him pictures. Had made sure he knew that somewhere in the world, he had a grandmother who'd once been strong and proud and good before life had beaten her down. The key opens safe deposit box 447 at First National Bank. Inside is everything I wanted to say but couldn't. All the years I stayed away. All the ways I tried to come home without actually coming home. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver, Mama. I'm sorry I left you to carry this alone. But maybe Noah can do what I couldn't. Maybe he can walk through the door I was too broken to open. The letter ended with a single line that shattered me. Tell her I never stopped being her daughter. I couldn't look at Noah. Couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe around the sob building in my chest. 20 years. 20 years I'd spent hating her. Building my entire identity around being the mother who'd been betrayed, abandoned, robbed. I'd let that story define me. I'd let it make me hard and cold and alone. And all that time, Elena had been suffering in ways I'd never imagined. Why didn't she just tell me? I finally managed to choke out. About Marcus? About being afraid? Why didn't she trust me to help her? Noah's expression was gentle but unflinching. Did you make it easy for her to tell you she was scared? Or did you make it clear that fear was weakness, and weakness wasn't allowed in your house? The question hit me like a slap. Because he was right. I'd raised Elena to be strong. To never show vulnerability. To handle her problems alone because that's what I had done. I'd been so busy teaching her to be tough that I'd forgotten to teach her it was okay to ask for help. I'd built a fortress and then wondered why my daughter couldn't find the door. The next morning, Noah and I went to the bank. I hadn't been inside First National in years. I'd switched to a credit union after Elena took the money, unable to face the building where my life had been erased. Walking through those doors again felt like stepping into a grave. The same fluorescent lights. The same gray carpet. Even Patty was still there, older now, her smile more tired but just as kind when she recognized me. "Mrs. Chin," she said softly. "It's been a long time." "I need to access a safe deposit box," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Number 447. Something flickered in Patty's eyes, recognition, maybe, or sympathy. She nodded, checked my ID, had me sign in, and led us to the vault. The box was small. Unassuming. But when the clerk pulled it from its slot and set it on the table in front of me, my hand started shaking so badly Noah had to help me open it. Inside were journals. 19 of them, bound with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. Underneath were photographs, Noah as a baby, a toddler, a teenager. Every milestone Elena had never been able to share with me, documented and saved like treasure. And at the bottom, a folder bulging with papers. Receipts. Bank statements. Letters from a women's shelter I'd founded 10 years ago, the one I'd started in my bitterness, wanting to help women who'd been abandoned and desperate. Noah reached for the folder, but I stopped him. "What is this?" "Look at the donation records," he said quietly. So I did. And what I found didn't make sense at first. Anonymous donations. Dozens of them. Spread across 18 years. Never large, a few $100s here, 1,000 there. But consistent. Relentless. Always arriving exactly when the shelter needed something specific, money for a security deposit when a woman was trying to leave. Bus fare for someone fleeing across state lines. Childcare costs so a mother could go to a job interview. The amounts were oddly specific. And when I cross-referenced them with the dates, they started exactly 1 year after Elena took the money. "She paid it back," I whispered, the realization crushing the air from my lungs. "She paid back every penny. Just, not to me." "She said you built something beautiful out of your pain," Noah said, his voice thick with emotion. "She said the least she could do was help you keep building it. So she became your silent partner. Your anonymous donor. Your..." "My daughter," I finished, tears streaming down my face. She was still my daughter, even when I'd convinced myself she wasn't. But there was still the journals. 19 years of Elena's private thoughts, waiting to be read. I took them home. Spent 3 days reading them while Noah stayed in my guest room, the room I'd never let anyone use, the room I'd kept as empty as my heart. The first journals were raw with fear. Elena wrote about nightmares where Marcus found her, about jumping at every knock on the door, about calling the Seattle police so many times to ask if anyone was looking for her that they started to recognize her voice. Then came healing. Slow, painful, documented in shaky handwriting. Therapy sessions. Support groups. The gradual realization that she might actually survive this. The middle journals were about Noah. About how becoming a mother had cracked her open in ways both terrifying and beautiful. About how she'd look at him and see me, my stubbornness, my strength, my absolute refusal to quit, and feel simultaneously grateful and guilty. I'm raising him the way you raised me, Mama. Teaching him to be strong. But I'm also teaching him it's okay to be scared. I'm trying to do better. I hope that counts for something. But it was the last few journals, the ones written after she'd started donating to the shelter, that destroyed me completely. Elena had followed my life obsessively. She knew when I'd sold the house, when I'd moved, when I'd started the shelter. She'd clipped newspaper articles about the shelter's fundraisers and pasted them in her journal, writing little notes in the margins. Mama raised $12,000 at the gala tonight. She looks older in the photo. Tired. I did that to her. But look how many women she's helping. Look what she built from the ashes I left her. Year after year, Elena documented her guilt, her longing, her desperate attempts to be part of my life from a distance. She wrote letters to me that she never sent, hundreds of them, tucked between the journal pages like pressed flowers. And in the very last entry, written a week before she died, Elena's handwriting was shaky but determined. I'm out of time. The cancer won. But Noah promised he'd find you. Promised he'd give you the key. I hope it opens more than a box, Mama. I hope it opens the door I was too afraid to walk through. Tell her I never stopped being her daughter. Tell her I came home every time I sent money. Every time I clipped an article. Every time I whispered her name into the dark and hoped, somehow, she could hear me. Tell her I'm sorry. And tell her I love her. Even if she can't love me back anymore. I sat at my kitchen table that night, the same table where I'd opened Elena's letter, where I'd made tea for the grandson I never knew I had, and I finally let myself break. Not the careful, controlled crying I'd allowed myself over the years. But the kind of sobbing that comes from your bones, from the deepest parts of you that you've kept locked away because you knew if you ever let them out, you might never be able to put them back. I cried for Elena. For the years she'd spent terrified and alone. For the courage it must have taken to leave. For the shame that kept her away even after she was safe. I cried for myself. For the 20 years I'd spent nursing hatred instead of grief. For the pride that had made me so rigid Elena couldn't tell me she was in danger. For the walls I'd built that had kept everyone out, including the daughter who'd been trying desperately to find a way back in. And I cried for all the time we'd lost. All the moments we could have had if I'd just been softer, if she'd just been braver, if the world had just been a little less cruel. Noah found me there at 3 a.m, my face pressed against the journals, Elena's words blurred with my tears. He didn't say anything. Just sat down across from me and waited. Finally, I looked up at him and asked the question that had been building in my chest since the moment he'd appeared at my door. How do you forgive someone who's already dead? How do you let go of anger at a ghost? And how do you live with the knowledge that you spent 20 years hating someone who deserved your mercy instead? Noah reached across the table and took my hand, the first physical comfort I'd accepted from another human being in longer than I could remember. I think, he said softly, you start by forgiving yourself first. So let me ask you something, What would you do if you discovered that the person who hurt you most had actually been protecting you in the only way they knew how? Would it change your anger? Would it heal your wounds? Or would it just replace one kind of pain with another, the pain of wasted years and chances forever lost? Because that's where I was. Standing at the edge of a truth so big and so devastating that I didn't know if I could survive falling into it. But I was about to find out. So here's the question I couldn't answer that night, sitting across from my grandson in the small hours of the morning: can you forgive someone who isn't there to receive it? Because that's what I was facing. 20 years of anger, resentment, and carefully constructed hatred, all of it aimed at a woman who'd been dead for 6 months. A woman who'd spent nearly 2 decades trying to make amends in the only way she knew how. A woman who'd never stopped being my daughter, even when I'd convinced myself she'd stopped being anything at all. Noah squeezed my hand across the table and said something that would stay with me forever: she's not here to hear you forgive her. But I am. And maybe that's enough. I looked at this young man, 24 years old, carrying his dead mother's final wishes like a sacred burden, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the moment he knocked on my door. Elena had come home. Just not in the way I'd imagined. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 20 years. I spoke Elena's name out loud on purpose. Noah was making coffee in my tiny kitchen. He'd figured out my ancient percolator faster than I ever had, and I was sitting at the table, one of Elena's journals open in front of me. This one was from year 7, when Noah was 4 years old. "Tell me about her," I said quietly. "Tell me about Elena. Not the girl I raised. The woman she became." Noah turned, coffee pot in hand, and his face softened in a way that made him look even more like her. "Where do I start?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. I need to know who she was when she wasn't busy running from her past." So he told me. And with every story, every memory, every small detail, I began to piece together a woman I'd never known, a woman who sang off-key to Etta James while cooking dinner, who left encouraging notes and library books for strangers to find, who volunteered at a soup kitchen every Thanksgiving because she said she knew what it felt like to be hungry for more than just food. She was funny, Noah said, settling into the chair across from me. Really funny. This dry, unexpected humor that would catch you off guard. She'd say these profound things and then undercut them with a joke so you wouldn't realize she just changed your perspective on something. I found myself smiling, actually smiling, at the image. She got that from her father. He could make me laugh even when I wanted to stay angry at him. "She talked about you all the time," Noah continued, his voice gentle. "I grew up knowing I had a grandmother who was strong and proud and good. She made sure I understood that what happened between you two wasn't your fault. She never let me blame you." And that's when I realized Elena had been protecting me, even from her own son's potential resentment. Over the next few weeks, Noah stayed. And slowly, carefully, we began building something neither of us had expected: a family. It started small. Breakfast together. Him asking about my day at the shelter. Yes, I still volunteered there 3 times a week, unable to let go of the thing I'd built from my pain. Me asking about his life in Seattle, his job as a graphic designer, the apartment he'd left behind to fulfill his mother's dying wish. "You didn't have to come," I said one morning, watching him butter toast with the same methodical precision Elena had always used. "You didn't owe me anything." "I owed her," he said simply. "And she was right. You deserved to know the truth." We fell into a rhythm. He'd work remotely from my apartment, his laptop set up at the kitchen table, while I went about my routines. We'd have dinner together, nothing fancy, just the simple meals I'd learned to make for one, now stretched to feed 2. And in the evenings, we'd sit together while I read more of Elena's journals, and he'd fill in the gaps with his memories. It was during one of those evenings that Noah said something that cracked open a question I hadn't known I was carrying. She wanted to come back, he said quietly. At the end, when she knew she was dying. She talked about it constantly. About driving here, knocking on your door, facing you. But she was terrified you'd slam that door in her face. And she said she'd rather die with hope that you might forgive her someday than die knowing for certain that you wouldn't. I set down the journal I'd been reading. She really thought I'd turn her away? Wouldn't you have? If she'd shown up 6 months ago, before you knew any of this, wouldn't you have? The honest answer sat heavy in my chest, yes. I would have. Without hesitation. But something was shifting in me, like tectonic plates grinding against each other, reshaping the landscape of who I was. I started noticing things I'd stopped noticing years ago. The way morning light hit the window in my apartment. The sound of Noah's laugh, so much like Elena's it sometimes stopped my heart. The way it felt to have someone to talk to over breakfast, someone who looked at me like I mattered. For 20 years, I'd convinced myself I was fine alone. That I didn't need anyone. That needing people was the weakness that led to devastation. But having Noah there showed me the lie I'd been living. I wasn't fine. I was just surviving. There's a difference. One afternoon, Noah asked if he could see the shelter. Mom donated to it for 18 years, he said. I'd like to see what she was helping build. So I took him. The Harbor House Women's Shelter sat on the edge of town in a renovated church building, 14 beds, a communal kitchen, a children's play area, and offices where women could meet with counselors, lawyers, and job placement specialists. I'd founded it 12 years ago with a small grant and a lot of rage. Rage at Elena for leaving me helpless. Rage at myself for not having options when I'd been young and struggling. Rage at a world that made women choose between safety and survival. The director, Maria, greeted us at the door. She was a former resident who'd stayed on his staff, a fierce woman with silver-streaked hair and a handshake that could crush bones. Margaret! She pulled me into a hug I hadn't been expecting. And who's this? This is Noah, I said, and something about saying it out loud, claiming him publicly, made it feel more real. My grandson. Maria's eyes went wide. She knew my story. Everyone who worked at the shelter knew it. It was part of why I'd built this place, turning my private devastation into public good. It's wonderful to meet you, Maria said, shaking Noah's hand. Then she turned to me with a knowing look. You should show him the donor wall. The donor wall was in the main hallway, a modest display listing everyone who'd contributed over the years. Major donors had plaques. Regular donors were listed on printed sheets behind glass, updated annually. And there, on a separate small plaque that I'd somehow never noticed, were the words. In gratitude to our anonymous guardian angel, whose faithful gifts have touched countless lives. You know who you are. I'd approved that plaque years ago, never questioning who the anonymous donor might be. Never imagining it could be Elena. Never thinking to look at the donation records closely enough to see the pattern, the timing, the amounts, the way they always arrived exactly when we needed them most. She was here, I whispered, running my fingers over the engraved letters. All this time, she was here. Noah stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder. She said this place was the best version of who you could have been. She wanted to help you be that person. And suddenly, I understood, Elena hadn't just been trying to pay back the money. She'd been trying to participate in my healing, even from a distance. Maria showed us around, the bedrooms where women slept safely for the first time in months or years, the kitchen where they cooked meals together and learned they weren't alone, the playroom where children who'd witnessed too much could just be children again. Every room, every service, every bit of hope contained in these walls had been partly funded by the daughter I'd spent 20 years trying to erase. We were standing in the children's playroom when Noah asked the question I'd been avoiding. What happens now? With us, I mean. Do I go back to Seattle? Is this just closure, or is it something more? I looked at this young man, my grandson, this gift Elena had given me from beyond the grave, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could let him leave. Let this be a beautiful, painful moment of resolution and nothing more. Go back to my small apartment and my small life and my carefully maintained solitude. Or I could be braver than Elena had been. Braver than I'd been for 20 years. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm 73 years old, Noah. I don't know how to be someone's grandmother. I barely knew how to be someone's mother, and we saw how that turned out. That's not fair, Noah said gently. You were a good mother. Mom never blamed you for what happened. She blamed herself for not being honest with you. But she was right not to trust me with her fear. I made strength mandatory and vulnerability impossible. I built a house with no doors, and then I wondered why she had to break a window to escape. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, so build different this time. Build something with doors. Build something where it's okay to be scared, and it's okay to need help, and it's okay to stay. And that's when I realized, forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of anger at Elena. It was about letting go of anger at myself. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 2 decades, I unpacked the boxes. The ones I'd stored when I sold the house. The ones containing Elena's childhood things, her baby blanket, her school photos, her report cards with teachers' notes about how bright she was, how creative, how she sometimes seemed to be looking at things the rest of them couldn't see. Noah helped me sort through them. We spread everything across my living room floor, a museum of a life I'd tried to forget. Tell me about this, Noah would say, holding up a photo or a trinket, and I would tell him. Stories I'd locked away for 20 years came tumbling out, Elena's first word, it was no, which should have told me everything, her obsession with butterflies when she was 6, the time she tried to give a homeless man her birthday money and I'd scolded her for it. I told her she needed to think about her own future, I said, shame coloring my voice. That giving away money we didn't have was irresponsible. And she looked at me with these big, disappointed eyes and said, but Mama, he needs it more than I need a cake. She never stopped being that person, Noah said softly. Even when life tried to beat it out of her. We stayed up until 3 in the morning, building something I didn't have a name for yet, a bridge between past and present, between grief and hope, between the mother I'd been and the grandmother I might become. When we finally went to bed, exhausted and wrung out, Noah paused at the door to the guest room, the room I'd kept empty for 20 years, like a shrine to my loneliness. Thank you, he said. For letting me in. For listening. For trying. Thank you for coming, I replied. For being brave enough to knock on the door when you had every reason to believe I'd slam it in your face. Would you have? If I'd come 6 months ago? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Probably, I admitted. But you came at exactly the right time. Because 6 months ago, I still needed to believe I was the victim. And now I think I'm ready to be something else. What's that? Your grandmother. Noah stayed another week. Then another. His remote job gave him flexibility, and my small apartment had just enough room for 2 people learning how to be family. We established new routines. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. Wednesday evenings volunteering together at the shelter. Sunday afternoons going through more of Elena's journals, filling in the gaps of her life, understanding the woman she'd become. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, something inside me that had been frozen for 20 years began to thaw. I started going to church again, not the one where people had whispered about me, but a different one across town where no one knew my story. Noah came with me. We sat in the back pew, and when the pastor talked about forgiveness, I didn't flinch away from the word anymore. I visited Elena's grave for the first time. Noah had taken care of the arrangements before he came to find me, a simple headstone in a cemetery in Seattle with her name, her dates, and the words she'd chosen herself. She tried. Standing there, looking at my daughter's name carved in stone, I finally said the words I'd needed to say for 20 years. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made you feel like you couldn't tell me. I'm sorry I was so hard. I'm sorry I wasted 20 years being angry when I could have been trying to understand. And I'm sorry you died thinking I might never forgive you. I placed flowers on her grave, yellow roses, her favorite, a detail I'd learned from Noah. But I do forgive you, I continued, my voice breaking. And I hope, wherever you are, you can forgive me too. For not being softer. For not being safer. For not being the kind of mother you could have come home to. Noah stood beside me, crying quietly, and when I was done, we stood there together until the sun began to set. 3 months after Noah first knocked on my door, I made a decision. I invited him to stay permanently. To make my small apartment his home, or to let me help him find a place nearby, or whatever configuration of closeness he was comfortable with. I'm 73 years old, I told him over breakfast. I don't know how much time I have left. But whatever time it is, I don't want to spend it alone anymore. And I don't want to spend it regretting that I let you leave when Elena sent you here to stay. Noah smiled, that smile that was so much like his mother's it made my heart ache in a good way. I was hoping you'd ask. I already talked to my boss about transferring to the Portland office. It's only an hour away. You were that confident I'd come around? No, he said honestly. I was that hopeful. There's a difference. So here's what I learned about forgiveness, it's not a single moment. It's not a dramatic confrontation where everyone cries and hugs and everything is magically fixed. Forgiveness is a practice. It's waking up every morning and choosing, again, to let go of the bitterness. It's reading your dead daughter's journals and choosing to see her complexity instead of just her betrayal. It's opening your home to her son and choosing to build something new instead of protecting something old. It's messy. It's imperfect. Some days I still feel angry at Elena for leaving. Some days I feel angry at myself for making her feel like she had to. Some days I feel angry at the world for being so cruel that a young woman had to choose between her safety and her mother. But most days now, I feel something else, gratitude. Gratitude that Elena survived long enough to raise an incredible son. Gratitude that she never stopped trying to make amends, even when she thought I'd never know about it. Gratitude that Noah was brave enough to honor her final wish. And gratitude that I'm getting a chance to be a grandmother, to do better this time, to build something with doors instead of walls. Last week, Noah and I went through the last of Elena's journals together. We were sitting in what used to be my lonely apartment but now feels like a home, and he read aloud the final entry, the one Elena wrote a week before she died. The one that ended with, "Tell her I never stopped being her daughter." When he finished, we sat in silence for a long time. Then Noah closed the journal and said, "Do you think she knew? At the end? That you'd forgive her?" "I think she hoped," I said. "And maybe hope was enough. Is it enough for you?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," I said finally. "It's not enough. But it's a start. And sometimes a start is all you get." Noah nodded. Then he said something that changed everything. "She wanted me to tell you one more thing. Something she made me memorize because she was afraid she'd forget it when the morphine got bad." "What is it?" She said, "Tell Mama that every woman who walked through the doors of that shelter, every child who slept safely in those beds, every life that was saved because of the work she built, tell her that was me coming home. Every single time. Tell her I came home 1,000 times, just never in the way she expected. And tell her it counts. Tell her it all counts. So let me tell you what I know now, at 73 years old, sitting in an apartment that's no longer empty. Love doesn't always look like we think it should. Sometimes it looks like a rusted key and a stack of journals. Sometimes it looks like anonymous donations and clipped newspaper articles. Sometimes it looks like a grandson knocking on your door with his dead mother's final wishes. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean the pain never happened. It just means you stop letting the pain be the only thing that happened. Elena took $47,000 and disappeared 20 years ago. She destroyed my life as I knew it. But she also, in her own broken, imperfect way, built something beautiful from the rubble. She turned my pain into purpose. My isolation into connection. My endings into beginnings. She came home. Just not in the way I expected. And maybe that's the lesson here, the people we love don't always return the way we imagine. They don't always apologize the way we need. They don't always fix what they broke. But sometimes, if we're brave enough to accept it, they come back in smaller ways. In the legacy they leave. In the children they raise. In the quiet acts of restitution they perform from the shadows. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Now I have a question for you, and I really want you to think about this. Is there someone in your life you've been carrying anger toward? Someone who hurt you, betrayed you, or left you in ways that felt unforgivable? And what would it mean, not for them, but for you, to at least consider that maybe, just maybe, there's a part of the story you don't know yet? I'm not saying you have to forgive them. I'm not saying what they did was okay. I'm just asking, what if holding on to the anger is costing you more than letting go would? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me about your own experiences with forgiveness, betrayal, or family wounds that never quite healed. Because these stories? They're not just mine. They're ours. And sometimes, sharing them is the first step toward healing. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that it's never too late to open a door you thought was permanently closed, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because Elena was right about one thing, we all deserve to come home, even if we have to do it in our own way. My name is Margaret. This was my story. And I'm finally ready to stop living in the past and start living in the present, with my grandson, with my memories, and with the knowledge that love, even broken love, can echo through time. Thank you for listening.